Yes, we can document the wedding.
All right, we could, yeah. Good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today, oh, that's a good point.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
Eastern time, so it's 4.
Today we have a lot of ground to cover. If we don't finish, then we don't finish. So be it.
Leaving town anyway, what do you care?
I'm out of here. I'm going to New York tomorrow. You guys can fend for yourself.
What time are you going?
The 2:00 flight tomorrow afternoon,
He's gonna be recording.
probably, but I'm not going to. We're starting on the very top line of Samach Vav Amud Beis, and supposedly we're going to be learning Samach Zayin as well. We'll see how far we get. The Gemara says as follows. Amar le Mar Yenuka Umar Kshisha B'nei de Rav Chizda le Rav Ashi. Fascinating. His children both had the same names. So there's actually Rav Chaim Palaji in the back of the Masifta actually says that Ladina, you're allowed to name your children the same name. It's not something we would do. It's terribly inconvenient. You know those families like Shlomo and Shmuel and like Dov and David. Like we know families like this. The Mauers have kids like that, Dov and David. So it's mutter to name your kids the same exact name. So one was Mar Yenuka, one was the younger Yenuka, the younger Mar, and the other was Mar Kshisha. The Balei Tosfos say no. Mar Yenuka was the child who was born when the father was a Yenuka, so he's actually the older child. What are you gonna say?
Shiur asked different Malkiel, I believe. Simcha is a interchangeable name.
Yeah.
Somebody had a son named Simcha. I don't know if he can name his daughter Simcha.
No.
Son Simcha, it's my father's son. My daughter. Remember, that was in March. Yeah, I know, well, no, it was there. I'm Larry, this is my brother Darryl, my other brother.
Oh, very good.
But that is a real child.
Yeah.
Asked.
Fascinating,
Yeah.
fascinating.
Seriously.
So the Chorah is mutter from our Gemara, but you're raising another element
He
of,
was against
two
it.
genders.
And he was against it, and then he went on a little bit of a tangent, if you will, against moving names between boys and girls. But I'm in the absolute rights, don't understand it. There's 72 examples that he then cites of where the same name is like Atana had this name, but yet it's a female.
Yeah, we have Chana.
In Novi somewhere.
We have Chana. Yeah,
You
then
know, Chana is spelled differently. But
with an aleph.
Hava actually is one that he brings.
Vada Baraba, yeah.
Yonah is used for both. Simcha is used for both.
Simcha.
That's the example,
Noah.
actually. So
Not really.
He brings, I think the number was like 72 examples.
But it does create a problem when you're calling somebody to the Torah. How do you know which one it is?
For the children?
Paul, usually the boy.
You look at him in the eye.
It's usually the
Say,
boy.
you.
Not that case, David.
Come on, transition.
Okay, we've done nothing in 10 minutes. Chevra, we have to learn. Okay. So it says the Gemara, he has two, all we've discussed is that he has two children that is the same name. That's all that's happened. It's been great learning with you. Have a good night. Call to. So the Gemara says that the children of Rav Chizda said to Rav Ashi, Hachi Amri Nahardoi Mishmei Rav Nachman. They said in Naharda, in the name of Rav Nachman, the following. Hi asmachta, when there is an asmachta, bismane at the 3-year mark, Kanya, that works. Below Zmane, but during the 3 years, low Kanya. It's kind of like no early termination, right? You can't cancel a loan in the middle, but the asmachta would work at the end, namely the condition that we said. I'm going to lend you $100. If I don't pay you back by 3 years, you get the property that I've left you as a mashkanta. So says the Gemara, that's like, Captain Obvious a little bit. Amarle, call me the bismane kani, below zmane lo kani. What are you talking about? Pashut, that it would work at the 3 year. If you hold asmachta as kanya, we would assume that the asmachta is kanya at the 3 year mark and not sooner. And even if you wanted to work earlier, it would not work. Says the Gemara, no, dilma hachi kam risu. Perhaps this is really what the Nahardai people were saying in the name of Rav Nachman, that Ashkeche begoz zmane va'amar leikani. Let's say that I'm the borrower. You lent me money. So I come up to you at year 2 and I say, look, I'm never going to get the rest of this money. Just take my house. Take my property, my mashkon property. Says the Gemara, the halacha is kani. However, basar zmani, if you were to say at the end of the loan that tshuva amar leikani, that would not actually be sufficient. This is a very odd twist. Lo kani, why my time? But because machmas kisubuhu de ka'amar le, the whole thing is just uncomfortable. He's got to get rid of his property. So that is not yet enough of a kinyan. But the Gemara says, Velohi, this is actually not true. Samach Vava Mebeis, 10 lines down. De'afilu begoz mane nami lo kani. We don't allow for anyone to shorten the time frame of the asmachta. So if I give you a loan if you give me a loan, that was the example, you lend me $100 and I say, thank you so much for the $100. If I default, you can have this property. Even begos money, there's no such thing. There's no kinyan at all. You have to wait until you get all the way till the end of the loan. But and when it said kani earlier, is kasabar kimatas money. What his intent was to say, I don't want to bother you later. It's gonna be easier to just get it done now, but it's not a svara. Okay, says the Gemara, Amar Papa, Haya Asmachta Zimnin Kanya, Vizimnin Lo Kanya. He says a cryptic line and says that an Asmachta, which is a loan that is conditioned with a default of a mashkon, sometimes it's kona and sometimes it's not kona. This almost looks like a new shita. We have Asmachta Kanya, Asmachta Lo Kanya, and then we have Rav Papa. So we have to figure out what does this mean. There's three possible answers. Some of these answers are similar to one another. Ashkeche. If there is a case scenario at the end of the 3 years, the kashasi shichra, the guy is sitting there at the end of the 3rd year kicking back a beer, and he hasn't yet paid back the rest of the loan. So what does that show you? He's not stressed. He knows it's not going to work, and therefore kani. Therefore the asmachta works. And halacha is that the malveh gets to keep the property. However, to kamahape chazuze, if we see that the person in the 11th hour is chasing down lenders and he's trying to get money and he's borrowing from the in-laws, then lo kani. Then that's at that point the asmachta is not done because he's obviously not done trying to get the loan. That's interesting because even though the time kicked in, but his effort is still showing that he's not done yet. So this is very unique where a papa straddles the fence of asmachta kanya and asmachta lo kanya. Amalei Ravachim difti leravina. Dilma, that's not true. Maybe the guy is drinking lifekuche pachde koshasi. We were talking about, a sober month of May. Says the Gemara, maybe he was drinking out of stress. I don't know people who drink out of stress, but maybe there are people who drink out of stress. That's what the Gemara says. So maybe we thought he was drinking a beer, he was kicking back a beer because he was all chilled and relaxed and he's accepted the fate that his mashkon property is going to be lost. No, maybe he's drinking because he's an alcoholic and this is what he does when he's anxious. Inami, another possibility is the reason he's drinking that beer is because inishachrina asmachez azuze. He's got a sugar daddy. He doesn't have to worry about it. He doesn't care. Pasha doesn't care. So therefore, not a raya from there, and that can't be what Rav Papa means. And therefore, the Gemara says about a third of the way down, El Amaravina ikapid bidmei, if he's makbid to sell things only at their right price, because that if let's say he does like a garage sale, but he sells everything at a spitz price. He doesn't water down the pricing. Why? Because he needs to collect the money to pay. Okay. So if you're being makbid on how you sell your products, vadai kani, that shows us that you're trying, that you're being very makbid on your money. So then vadai kani, then that would actually work. Amalei Ravachami difti the Ravina Dilma Savar Kiechid Delotis Zal Are. Perhaps the reason why he's being makbid on his price is because he doesn't want people to walk all over him and start selling his property at a lower price. Oh, well, I saw that you sold your Peloton for $2,000 off of this ticket price. Let me buy your house for $200,000. No, he doesn't want to do that. So perhaps that's a svar. So then the third and final answer is Ela Amar Rav Papa Ikapid Be'ara. If he's not even willing to sell property at its normal price, then Vadai Kani. Then under those circumstances, then the asmachta is definitely going to be corner. Let's continue with this discussion about asmachta, continuing with the same person in discussion, which is Rav Papa. Damar Rav Papa, Afagav Damar Rabbanon, asmachta lo kanya, even though the rabbis are of the opinion that an asmachta doesn't work against our Mishnah, but aputiki havia lemigba, but it can function as an aputiki, a property that can be collected from the people who the malva owes money to. Amarle Rav Huna bered Rav Nasan the Rav Papa. How can that be? Mika Amarle Kani leguvaina. Who says that when I give you the mashkon so that you'll give me the loan, that you're allowed to give it away to other people for collection? That makes no sense. It's a mashkon for me. You don't get to use it for you. It says the Gemara Amarle Marzut bered Rav Mari le Ravina Vi Amar Kani la migba mine Kani. And if you want to say kani the migba mine kani, that he gives permission, would that be allowed? So if it's still an asmachta, he asmachta lo kanya. Even if I, the lova, would have given you permission, it doesn't matter. The mashkon is there. It's only meant to guarantee my loan. It's not meant to ever be used for other things. Ella, what was Rav Papa talking about? Ella aputiki to ka'amar Rav Papa ma'i. What was Rav Papa talking about the aputiki to amar le lo yehelecha piraon Ella mizu. What he was talking about was that he would still allow collection of the land, and up to the amount that he's owed. That's how the Rishonim here explain. So that means that if I borrowed $100, so you can give up about up to $100 of property to people to whom you owe money. That's considered acceptable in regards to the apotiki. Next case, a little bit more than halfway down. Who gavra the zavin le ara lechabre be'achrayas. So you and I make a sale between each other, and we sell property be'achrayas. And what that means is that if, let's say, I'm the buyer, so that means if one of your collectors comes to take the property from me, I can go back to you and you'll pay me back. But I negotiate the following with you. Amar le itarfu le minoi migbisli meide idis to islach. Look, when you pay me back, I want you to pay me back from the most excellent, highest quality land that you have. Amar le, look, I'm a nice guy, but meidi idis lo magbinalach. I'm not giving you from my aleph properties. But the mekam kama, those need to stay with me. I'm not giving you my best properties. It's an odd request. Ela magbinalach meidis acherim deisli. I can give you some of my nice properties. I'm not going to give you the zibris, but I'll give you some nice properties. They're idis.
Assuming he doesn't have the money.
No, just they're just negotiating in regard. No, because I bought land from you with achraya. So if you owe money to my father comes to me and takes the property you gave me, I can go back to you and say, Tex, you got to give me another piece of land. My dad collected. So when I'm collecting, I said to you, I will only want ide idis. You can say back to me, Phil, it's not. Don't ask like that. It's not right. I'll give you a nice property, but don't ask for ide idis. It's not right. And then Lasov Tarfu Amine, at the end of the day, my father comes and takes my property that I bought from Tex, and now I have to go back to Tex. Asa Bidka Shakil Ide Idis. Unfortunately, there was a flood, and Tex's Ide Idis properties were ruined. This is what happened this morning with Torah softball. The fields were flooded. Nebuch. Instead, I learned Torah. Well, where are the values here? So it says the Gemara. Should I edit this out? It says the Gemara. Savar Papa lemeimar meidis amar le v'hakaima. So I go over to Tex and say, hey, listen, I know you said no ide idis, but you said I can have idis, and you still have idis. You may not have ide idis anymore; they flooded, but at least you have the idis. So you say back to me, Tex, Amar le ravachim edifti l'ravina, v'leima Tex should say back to Phil, ki amri lach ana. When I said that you can have that, the idis magbina lach to have a ide idis kaima. The only reason my idis wasn't my best was because I had ide idis above it. But now that the ide idis have been destroyed, now your ide idis is idis. It's not just the regular idis. So therefore, hashta kaimale idis b'makom ide idis. So it should be the case. It should have been the case that I should not be able to collect from the current idis, which is now the ide idis. Instead, Tex will give me from the baininus, and that's considered acceptable. So this has applications when a person is collecting a debt, and I'm walking through your house, and I'm like, I'll take that gold statue. You're like, you'll take the silver goblet, Yeah, Tex has no obligation to give me of the finest of his properties, even though the dollar values will, of course, equate. Gold is more expensive per ounce, and so it doesn't matter. He is not obligated to give from his finest properties. Do you have a question?
Yeah, the finest properties, can you be given less than the middle properties
The
and?
Ziburis?
Yeah,
Seemingly, from this case, no, but I don't know the details. What are the rules about that? We had this already.
Yeah, it's the value, based on the value.
Right, I know, I'm trying to remember the principle. Some things were
Total
paid.
value will be the same.
Remember
Obviously,
the
because-
get ksuba was always paid, was always paid nicely, no? Yeah, I don't remember all the rules. I don't know. But Lamaisa, I, as the person who bought the property from Tex, I can't demand from Tex that he pays me back with the ide idis. It's not right. Rab Bar Shava have a masik bei Rav Kahana Zuzek. There was a loan, and he owed some money to Rav Kahana. Amar le ilo pranalach liyom ploni gavi mehai chamra. If I don't pay you back by a certain time, so then the halacha is I'm giving you a condition. Not the halacha is I'm saying you can have my fancy bottle of wine that I have in the cellar. Savar of Papa Meimar ki armina nasmach lokanya hanimili ba'ara the lav lizvune kaima. That maybe when we say asmachtas lokanya, maybe that's only true by karka, which is not so commonly sold. Since my house has been built, it's traded hands less than 10 times. but you can find things in a store that have been sold 50 times. Go on eBay, whatever. There's a lot of hand-me-downs, less today than in the past, but there still are. So that's what he says. It may be by land that we wouldn't say, maybe that's where we would say asmachta lokanya val chamra, but by wine, kaven de lezvune kai, since it's a very common thing that's sold. So says the Gemara, perhaps kizuze dami, perhaps it's no different than money, and the condition that he made would be better than a regular case of asmachta. It's fascinating that metaltalin, when they're conditioned, are like zuze. It's not an asmachta anymore. It's just cash. It says the Gemara, Omar le Rav Huna bered Rav Yoshua Rav Papa, Hachi Amrinan Mishmei de Rabba, Kol de'i lokani. Every time you have a condition made, that if it is not konya. Code word, even by metaltalin we say asmachta lokani. Even though it's much closer to being like zuzi, to being like zuzi, to being like money, that's not how we hold the ma'aseh. Amar Rav Nachman, Hashtad Amar Rabbanan asmachta lokanya. Now that we know that both by ara and by metaltalin that we say asmachtas lokanya, 8 lines from the bottom, hadar ara v'hadre pere, then the land that is sold inappropriately through an asmachta needs to be returned, and so do the fruits. Says the Gemara, the fruits need to be returned. Lememra de savar of Nachman mechila betos lo havya mechila. Are you trying to tell me that a mechila betos isn't a mechila, right? It was a mechila betos. We tried to make an asmachta. It wasn't correct. Still have to return the fruits. Says the Gemara, is that true? After all, it shouldn't be that it isn't mochel the peros. Says the Gemara, hamocher peros dekel lechavero. Says the Gemara, if a person says that all of the fruits that will in the future grow on this tree, I will hereby sell to you. Until the fruits grow, the owner is allowed to be choser bo. Misha bo la'olam, but once they've grown in yachalachzer bo. Once the fruits have grown, then the owner can't go back on them. Rav Nachman Amar af misha bo la'olam yachalachzer bo. And this shows us that ein adam makned over shelo ba la'olam, because it's you made a condition before these fruits ever grew. That if in fact one were to have eaten these fruits, that he would not be mafkina. Now this last din of Rava is a kasha on Rav Nachman, because in the previous case it showed us that perhaps we thought this was the question 8 lines from the bottom, that Lememra the Savar of Nachman Mechila tos lo havya mechila. Yet over here, if I would have eaten these fruits, it says lo mafkina, which is mechila. So kasha on Rav Nachman. Says the Gemara, the classical distinction we've seen so many times in this Masechta already. Hasam zvini hacha halva. There's a difference between a sale and there's a difference between a halva. By a halva, we're going to be more makbid because we have concerns of ribis and avak ribis. But when it comes to a regular sale, we're not going to be as makbid. Omar Rava. Rava says, turning to the top of Samach Zayin Amud Aleph, we finally got to today's block. Have a Yasivna Kameh de Rav Nachman. Rava was sitting in front of Rav Nachman. Uboy le'osve ona. Rav Nachman started talking and said, but what about ona? And right away, Rav Nachman kicked up and he said, Ve'odikin, he made an inference about what I was going to say about ona. We don't yet know what Rava was going to say. But Rav Nachman said, I'll answer you from Chazis and islandness. I'll answer you from the case of an island. Says the Gemara, V'harei ona de mechila b'tosi, v'lo havya mechila. Ona is mechila b'tos. Ona, I didn't know about the ona. When you sold me something and it was overpriced, I didn't know about it. So that's mechila b'tos, v'lo havya mechila. And that was what he asked about. That was Rabba's question. We see from ona that it's mechila b'tos, lo havya mechila. Because the whole thing is batel mekach, as we saw in the last parak of Parak Hazah. The odik, and what did Rav Nachman infer? How did he know what to answer me? He said, Chazis and islandness. Hooray, what do we know about an islandness? Islandness, to mechila b'tosi, havya mechila. We know that it is a mechila. What is this talking about? It's not. There's a Mishnah that we've seen a couple of times in Shas already. Hamima'enes v'hashniya. We're not going to discuss these 2 cases right now. The third one is relevant to us. V'islandness, that's a woman who is unable to have children. Ein lahen, these women do not have lo ksuba v'lo peros v'lo mazonos v'lo blos. They don't get a ksuba payment. They don't get the fruits back from their nichsei malug. which is a sugya we've learned numerous times. Mazonos, they don't get their classical payments of mazonos from their husband if they're an islandist. They don't even get the clothing that they brought into the marriage. So that was the dialogue between Rava and Rav Nachman. You wanted to tell me that there's a difference between Zvini and Halva, says the Gemara. But wait 1 second, says Rava. What about the case of Ona? Because by Ona, we see that Mechila Batos lo havya Mechila. And Rav Nachman says, not a raya. I'll bring you a raya from an islandess where it is a Mechila. Says the Gemara, Velohi, this whole dialogue was off kilter. The whole thing doesn't make sense. Lo Ona havya tiyuvte. Really, the question of Rava from Ona was a ridiculous question, respectfully. Below islandess misayele, and an islandess is not a raya. Lo Ona tiyuvte. Why was Rava's question not a question about Ona? Because Ona has a chiddush to it, which is the lo yada de ise Ona de mochil gabe. By Ona, I have no idea that I'm being overcharged so that I can be mochel. I have no idea. But that's not what we're dealing with in our cases at the bottom of Samach Vav Amud Beis. So Ona is not shaykh. And below islandess misayele, you can't bring a raya from an islandess anyway. She has a chiddush too. The nichala de tepu kalashma de ishus. She thinks it's better for her to have a name of having been married versus not having been married. Which is very interesting because she's still an islandess. And nothing's going to change when she gets married. We assume that the problem is hers. We don't assume that she's not allowed to get married again, I presume. I don't know the halacha, but no, that's when the divorce kicks in. Says the Gemara, the islandess prefers to have been married. That's why it's a chiddush. It's a big stigma. Is that what you said?
No, I thought the 10-year rule was in effect, and
It is.
in effect is what?
That means that if a couple is married for 10 years and
They
the
don't
woman's
have
not able
kids.
to conceive, she's divorced without a ksuba.
But what happens if you know this up front?
How's the famous Shita of the Chazon Ish? He never had kids. He married someone who apparently he knew couldn't have children. So goes the story. I don't know. Have others heard this story? Those who I heard.
Children, I did not know.
Yeah, and I heard that this was the case. Yeah. Nor will you. Nor will you. You know what? You never know. The world has become a surprising place. Yeah. Anyways, this is a big shaila. I spoke to Rabbi Robinson, I believe, about this when we were learning this sugya, whatever Masech that was in. And I believe he said there are kulas if if the husband wants to be mevater and stay in the marriage without children. I believe there are some kulas to allow for that. Okay, next. A quarter of the way down on Samach Zayin Amanal. Hayetza de Amr Le'u Gavra Zil Zavin Li Ara Mikrivai. A woman says to a man, please go buy these properties from my family members. Azal Zavanla. So the husband or the guy he listens, he's a soldier, and he goes and buys property on behalf of this woman. Amar Le, the person who sold it, so the family member who sold it, we'll just call him Chaim. He says, Ihavu li zuzi, once I get enough money, mehadras la nehali. I want to buy it back. I want you to buy it back. Amarle, at v'navla achi. You and Navla, Rashi says that Navla was the name of this particular woman. You guys are siblings. We have no idea what this line means. It says the Gemara, Amar Rabba bar Avuna, Kol at v'navla achi amar. Anytime anybody says that phrase, Samchadaite v'lo gamaru makni. The Gemara says that it invalidates the whole thing. We already know that the case was us. We learned about this case already on Shabbos.
That did not work, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
The case it's us, it's ribbis. The case is a case of ribbis because we said that if we do that transaction, then he ends up getting his money back and having lived in the property, which is it's either ktsutza if they predefined it, which seems to be that's what they did. Seems to be that would be ribbis ktsutza. It's an Isur D'Oraisa. So says the Gemara, if in fact that transaction goes through, arahadra, you have to give the land back. Pirei mai. What about the payros? So says the Gemara, it depends. Ribis ktsutza. If in fact it's ribis ktsutza, they knew how much payros were going to be given. So then if that's true, then v'yatzu b'dayan. They can go to Bezdin, as we already saw. We hold like Rabbi Lazar, not Rav Yochanan, that by ribis ktsutza you can go and get it, and by ribis d'Rabbanan you can't. Odilmar perhaps are the payros in this particular case of the buying the property and the mocher saying, I want it back later. So So we don't know. So Amar Rabba Bar Rav Huna Mistabra Ki Avak Ribis Havu Ve'en Yotzim B'Dayanim. He says that it's only a din d'Rabbanan on the Peros in this case. And therefore, the ribis d'Rabbanan, the avak ribis that's collected can't be extracted. Amar Rava ki avak ribis havu ve'ein yotze b'dayan. Amar le Abai le Rava mashkanta mai. What if we had a similar conversation about a mashkanta? A mashkanta, of course, is collateral. So let's build the case. I borrow $1,000 from you, and I have a property. And the property is a mashkon, and we start discussing what's going to happen later. I say, well, if you end up defaulting on the property, I want you to make a deal that you'll buy back, that I can buy back from you when I have more money. So do we say hasam time amai? Maybe over there in the case of a classical sale, then not a mashkanta, but in a classical sale, that's mishum de lo katzle, hachanami lo katzle, that over there it wasn't a specified amount of payros, and over here it's also not a specified amount of payros. Or maybe in the regular case it's a zvini, it's a regular sale, but hacha by the mashkanta, it's a halva. So the Gemara responds 2/3 of the way down, answering up for the difference between a mashkanta where I negotiate that I want to repurchase it later, versus a sale where I negotiate that I want to repurchase it later. Amar le hasam time amay mishum de lo katzle hachanami lo katzle. It wasn't cuts. They didn't have ktsutza, and therefore the peiros are only the rabbanon. Amar Rav Papi, in contrast to this shita, who said that the peiros are only avak ribis, Rav Papi was avad Ravina uvda. He said Ravina did a case like this. V'chashi ve'apik pere. He actually did extract the peiros. De lo kiraba bar Rav Huna. We therefore see there's a machlokas about the peiros in cases which are done be'isser, where you pre-negotiate the repurchase of a property, which is ribis. But what about the peiros eaten during that time? That is a machlokas Rabba bar Rav Huna and Ravina in regards to whether or not the peiros are extractable from Bezdin, because they might be ktsutza. Okay, we're about 12 lines from the bottom of the page. Amar Mar Beredu Rav Yosef Mishmei de Rava. Hamashkanta be'asra de misalki. Let's talk about a place, a community, where the standard is that you are allowed to end a mashkon early. I can pay off early. So if I am able to pay off early, then achal shiur zuze. Then let's say you, the malve, right? You have my mashkon property, but you've eaten the amount of fruit from my property that's equivalent to the amount of money that I borrowed from you. So then halacha is misal kinanle. Then I can remove you, the malve, from the property. I borrowed $1,000 and I put up an orchard as a mashkon. You, the malve, ate $1,000 of fruit during the time that the mashkon was in your property. Misal kinanle. Now I can kick you out. Goodbye. Achal tfei. If the malve, ate too much, lo mafkinan mine. So then we're not allowed to extract it from him because it's avak ribis, because it wasn't ktsutza, we hadn't planned it out. And v'lo machshavinan mishtar l'shtara. If in fact he overeats, so let's say I lent you 1,000 and you ate $1,200 worth of my fruit. So there's a net balance in my favor. You owe me $200. And by the way, maybe we have another star between us. We don't allow that money to be coverage for another star. He has to pay the 200 and then cleanly deal with the other star. All of this is with a regular person. Uve de yasme, when it comes to yisomim, we're much more careful. Then achal shiur zuze misal kinan le. Yes, it's still the case that if the malve ate enough from the fruits of the property that was a mashkon for the yisomim, that we remove the malve. Aval achal tfei mafkinan mine. However, if the malve ate 1,200, which was more than the loaned amount of 1,000 of the yisomim, then mafkinan mine. We do take the extra 200 and cash, and we take it from the malve and give it back to the yisomim. Umachshavinan mishtar l'shtar. We make the lives of the yisomim a little bit easier. And what we do is, if there is an extra $200 in the malve's bank account because he overate on the fruits, and he therefore has to pay back the yisomim, but if there is another star between them, we make the yisomim's lives easier. We let the $200 transfer from one star to the next, no problem. And Amar Rav Ashi as follows: Hashta de amres ochal tvei lo mafkinan mine. In regards to a regular sale, not with yisomim, with a regular malve. If in that case we said lo mafkinan mine, and achal shiur zuze nami. If that's true, that if he ate too much, we're not going to take out the money from him. If he ate 1,200 when I only borrowed 1,000, we're not going to recollect. So Rav Ashi has a chiddush. Achal shiur zuze nami. Even if he ate the exact amount of money that I owed. So then, lo misal kinan le below zuze. You can't extract him from the property without repaying him money. And the Gemara says, my time, because it looks like avak ribis. Sluke below zuze, afuke minehu, have avak ribis. Ve'avak ribis eno yotze b'dayonos. Fascinating din. Let's paint the case. I borrowed $1,000 from you, and I gave you a mashkon to hold while I pay you back. Over the course of that time, you consumed an amount of fruit from my mashkoned property, from my collateraled property, that was equivalent to the amount of money that I borrowed from you. The Rav Ashi says, you can't take back the mashkon without giving him cash. Afal pi, that the dollars are actually even. I lent you 1,000, you consumed 1,000. Doesn't matter. Says the Gemara that if you don't actually give him dollars, you are not allowed to kick him off the property yet. You have to wait until the end of the term of the loan, or whatever the conditions were, 3 years, whatever it was. Fascinating then. And Ovid Rav Ashi Uvda v'yasomim kitanim. Rav Ashi had a little bit of a different lens. We're turning to the top of Samach Zayin and Beis. He said that he did an Uvda with yasomim kitanim, and he did so kigedolim. What does kigedolim mean? Rashi. Ve'afal gav shiur zuze lo misal kinan le, even though, excuse me, ve'afal gav de ochal shiur zuze lo misal kinan. The ksubim mitchilas achilos avak ribasu ve'en koach v'dayan lo tziyah. Says you're just not allowed. So there's a machlokes here as well. All right, let's continue with this.
We could be gadolim after 13 years.
It just means that we treat the asomim who were ketanim halachically like we would have treated a gadol, and we do so in this case strictly, where we don't allow the malveh to leave the property until the end of the term, because it looks like avak ribis, because he ate 1,000 and we only borrowed 1,000, so it just doesn't look right. The Gemara doesn't like it. Top of Samach Zayin Amid Beis. Look at that, we're making some headway here. Amar Rava Beredi Rav Yosef Mishmei de Rava. 2 Ravas. Hai Mashkanta, there was a collateral. Be'asrei de Misalke, in a place where I am able to remove the malveh from the mashkoned property. Lo nechul ela b'nichyasa. The malveh is only allowed to eat from the property if we reduce the, if we charge him for it, basically. The tzurba midrabanan. However, if you're a rav and the rav is the malveh, afilu b'nichyasa lo nechul. You're not allowed to eat even with a reduction. You're just not allowed to eat at all under those circumstances. Says the Gemara, is that really for sure true? In what way would we be able to have the tzurba me'rabanan, who's the malveh, eat from the property? Says the Gemara, a term that sounds confusing because we've already used it, bikitsusa. Right? What's bikitsusa? We don't know yet. We'll learn in a couple lines. Says the Gemara, okay, the tzurba me'rabanan can eat bikitsusa. We'll define it in a minute, but there's a problem with that, because on Samach Zayin Amid Beis, on the 5th line, the Gemara says, Hanicha l'man da'amar kitzusa sharia. Okay, some people allow kitzusa. Ela l'man da'amar kitzusa asira ma'ika l'meimar. If you want to say that the only way that the tzurba me'rabanan, who is a malveh, can eat from the property during the mashkon time period is bekitzusa, that's great. But what would we do according to the Shita that kitzusa is aser? The Itmar, after all, here's the machlokes about kitzusa. In regards to kitzusa, pligi barav acha v'ravina. Chad amar kitzusa sharia, v'chad amar kitzusa asira. So hechidam kitzusa. What is this case of kitzusa? It says the Gemara as follows. So amar le, ad chamesh shinin. We're going to learn about 10 more lines and then we'll stop. So people who need to go to Mar can go to Mar. To amar le, ad chamesh shinin, achil nala below nechyasa. You make a sharecroppers agreement. Up until the 5th year, you can eat, either malveh can eat without any reductions. After that, all of the crop goes to you. I would say that to the lover. Some say that this whole conversation was different. Everyone, no matter who you are, not just tzurba me'rabanan, everyone, the malveh who doesn't take a reduction is usher to eat the fruits. But what then would be the kitzusa? Says the Gemara, The only way the kitzusa would work is if we make this sharecroppers agreement. That's how the tzurba meirabanan would be able to eat. Up until 5 years, achilna b'nichyasa. I, the malve, even a tzurba meirabanan, can eat with a reduction as long as I'm charged for what I eat. Mikan va'elach shayminan lach kulu period. But then you can have the rest. You can have all the rest. And this works perfectly fine. This is what kitzusa is. The Meforshim explained that this is really not much different than the first approach, other than to say that it's actually written in a shtar. Is that when there's a written sharecroppers agreement between the tzurba meirabanan, who's the malva, then we allow him to say the first 5 years I eat the fruits, and all the rest of the time you eat the fruits, you the lova eat them. And now let's compare and contrast approach number 1 and approach number 2. Man de asar bekamaisa shari bebasraisa. The one who would asar in the first case would have allowed in the second case, because the second case was more machmir. The one who says that it's asr in the latter case, and the ika de amre, heicha shari the mecha. Then how would we have a case where he's able to eat? Shari ki mashkanta de surah. It would be permissible if it was like a mashkanta de surah. What's the mashkanta de surah? This was a specific type of collateral. The kasvi bei hachin, we'll stop with this. The mishalem shnin elaine tepuk ara da below kesef. After many years, then you get the rest for free. So I'll eat for the first many years, you'll eat for the next many years. We'll stop at Rav Papa, just about halfway down on Samach Zayin and Beis. Tomorrow night, I will not be able to give shiur at all at that time. Emir Hashem, I'll pre-record and post everything to catch us up. And then Emir Hashem will be back in person on Tuesday night. Wishing you all a beautiful night.